Trauma Chat with L&L takes the complexity out of trauma and makes it bite-sized.
Our goal is not to minimize it, but to normalize having conversations about the experience that many of us have without always knowing how to cope.
Trauma recovery is possible. Healing from past or even recent hurts is possible.
And we're both trauma therapists, so let's talk about it. I'm LaQuisha Fonrose, therapist, speaker, author, and owner of Holistic Quest Wellness. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and certified EFT practitioner, which stands for Emotional Freedom Technique. I specialize in supporting individuals and communities with discovering the tools, the strategies, and the insights to have better relationships with their thoughts and feelings so that they have more control in their lives.
And I'm Leticia Vaca Williams, a therapist, speaker, and owner of Urban Health Group, Inc. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, certified in brain spotting, and certified in EMDR, and I'm an experienced medical social worker. Urban Health Group is a boutique-style concierge for healthcare navigation and mental health support. Our ultimate goal is to empower Black, Indigenous people of color with tools and supports to effectively navigate their health and mental health needs for better wellness. Hello, everyone. Today, we're going to be talking about relational trauma. And this is really around the topic of traumatic experiences that we have with relationships. And that can be within our family, our friend groups, our intimate relationships, even folks at work, right? So it's how we relate to other folks. And in the therapy practice, we tend to title things. So you might start seeing things like relational trauma and really not know what it means, but it's about traumatic relationships, how folks present with it, what kind of issues come up, and also how you can work through it. What are your thoughts, or how does that come up for you in your therapy practice, Lucretia?
Yes, I feel like this is a topic that kind of oftentimes gets missed. And even when we talk about trauma, we think about like the physical abuse, the sexual abuse, like the neglect, severe neglect, those kinds of things. But there's a lot of like emotional and mental relational trauma that comes up or that people experience that kind of goes missed or it goes over people's heads as something that's not that serious or that is not traumatic, right? So a classic example that I give my clients is in a lot of Black communities, there was a saying of stop crying before I give you something to cry about. Something like that, depending on the child's age, their capacity, and all of these things, that could have been a traumatic experience, right? No physical abuse yet or, action taken yet, but just those words alone can be traumatic.
Yeah. And that's kind of attesting to things that happen kind of like in the childhood experience, how it begins to shape a person over time. And so the first kind of relationship folks tend to have is within their family members, their caregivers, your mom, your dad, your siblings. Now, everyone has stories, right? So not everything bad that happened is traumatic, but sometimes things that did happen are traumatic. When we think about, I have older siblings, and so some of this stuff, like getting trapped in the closet and, intentionally scare them, it could be fun and games until it starts developing, issues with, being in tight spaces, or I can't even trust my brother and sister. I'm definitely not trusting anyone else, right? So it can border, just playfulness, but it can start shaping how we connect to people with understanding the people we grew up with, who we shared a home with, how were our encounters.
I like that you used the example around the intent might not match the impact, right? So for your example, maybe the intent was to be playful or, just kind of like brother sister rivalry, sibling rivalry, right? But the impact could be much bigger than that. And I think that's a lot of times where it gets missed is that the person who's actually behaving and acting out in a way, it's like, that's not my intent to traumatize you or to do anything, but the impact might be traumatic.
Right. I'm just playing, right? I was just
Mhm.
playing with you. And it's like, but I don't like to be played with like that.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
kids don't tend to have that language. It's like, stop, or you're dumb, or leave me alone, or you try to avoid that person. So we see it, how it can be shaped earlier on, especially if it's ongoing, if it was a frequent occurrence where I just don't want to be around them. I'm looking for opportunities to get out or stay away or
Mm-hmm.
kind of reduce being singled out. And it comes up a lot, latchkey kids or kids who are unsupervised just for whatever reason, or if it's a rainy day and you don't have a lot of toys. So I don't want to um I need to say that poverty, can play an
Yes.
impact on the resources that may be available to a person. But we look at how are the relationships first started.
Mm-hmm.
If you were upset and you would go to a parent, what would their response be? Those are things that we tend to ask in my practice when we're looking at, well, what were things like for you growing up?
Yes, yes. And also just to piggyback off like that resource piece, right? Because that's huge. Thinking about just like parent dynamics or grandparent dynamics, like if there were resources in the home, like was there enough food, were bills getting paid, like how was their work environment? Were they resourced enough in their bodies to be able to create a safe space and show up and show out for the children in the home? That's a big one when
Yeah.
it comes to relational trauma because you have to have a solid relationship with yourself first to be able to create a safe relationship for other people. But also when external resources are lacking, we know that internal resources are compromised.
Yeah. And so when we're talking with folks, we look at all these different aspects. And that's why I'm really careful around pathologizing, saying, oh, you got PTSD. Well,
Mm-hmm.
you grew up in poverty where you didn't have a lot of resources. If you had support and resources, things might have looked different. So we have to be careful, but the impact on that person was still traumatic, is what I want
Mm-hmm.
to say. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that word can be jarring sometimes, like, oh, shoot, that did overwhelm me because I don't trust anyone. If I couldn't trust my mom or my dad to protect me,
Mm-hmm. How can I trust other people?
yeah.
Right. If I couldn't trust that my feelings were safe, that I was allowed to feel, that I was allowed to have big emotions, all of these things with the people who are supposed to take care of me, create safe spaces, and love me.
Mm-hmm.
How do I find that in the world? Can I find that in the world? Is it even possible?
Right. And so trust issues is one of the big things that folks come to there. I just can't trust nobody. And you might have had good reason not to trust people, but the concept that I can trust myself, that tends to be learned
Mm-hmm.
from your caregivers. How can I trust myself? And I think later we'll talk about this too, because it ain't all bad that some people rely on faith or certain practices or rituals to help them through hard times. But when it comes to how we start connecting to one another, um, it spills over into our peers as you get into middle school and high school and beyond. How you connect with others, you can see the bully in people, right? The
Mm-hmm.
bully, a lot of times have been bullied by people in their family.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That fight response, right? Like, I'm gonna get you before you get me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just what it's gonna be. And I noticed, especially with my caseload, it's either like it's on one end of the spectrum or another with relationships, current relationships. It's either um I'm gonna go all in and kind of like avoid red flags and like this is something that I'm used to, or maybe that's not a conscious awareness, but that's what's happening, right? So they tend to be in relationships where the boundaries are poor, they're getting taken advantage of, and they feel like things are being done to them constantly, all of the time,
and
or huh?
and intentionally.
Yeah, and intentionally, right? or the opposite end of the spectrum where you got one time to make a mistake and I'm done.
Yeah.
And I'm like, both ways can cause strained relationships,
Right.
unhealthy relationships, and maybe you don't have relationships at all or meaningful relationships, right? So that's
Mm-hmm.
a big one that I see in my practice, like that all or nothing.
Right. And they're protective, right? So even the folks who are givers, lovers, right? And some people call it I'm empathetic, I just am caring to no end, can find themselves being in unfulfilled or unsafe relationships
Mm-hmm.
based on past experiences. But they're like, I'm tired of this, right? I'm giving
Mm-hmm.
them everything I got and they still not treating me good. We look at, well, what else was going on there? And
Mm-hmm.
see that people pleasing tendency. So it can really, like you said, it can vary from these extremes where you're like zero tolerance, cutthroat, to overly pleasing, overly giving, and both of them are both resulting in hurt. I'm still
Yeah.
not fulfilled in this relationship, and it pains me to think about leaving,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
even in an unhealthy relationship, right?
Even in an unhealthy relationship. Absolutely. And there's always like an expectation, right? So with the overgiver, there's like an expectation of being seen, being appreciated, being validated, maybe that energy being returned, right? Like I did all of this for you and I get nothing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or even with the one who is kind of like cutthroat, like the expectation is see nobody in this world cares. Um people ain't nothing.
Right. Or you have to do this to show
Mm-hmm.
that
Exactly.
I'm
Yeah. Like
into you.
that list. I don't know if you've seen it floating around social media. Like it's a dating list of all of these places that you cannot take a woman on a date. And if you take a woman on these on to these places, then that's not good enough.
Okay.
And it's basically chain restaurants, bowling, movies, the
Fun.
park or something. I'm like, this doesn't sound like a bad first date to me. But right, like it's you got a list of everything that this person needs to do to show up for you first, and then they get a chance.
So that can be part of some relational trauma that comes from a place of lack, right? That I only want to experience these things. That doesn't mean the person has to be honest, that they have to be kind,
Mm-hmm.
they have to be considerate, but
No.
your how you value me or how you show me your value is how much money you spend.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
everyone got different needs, right? But when we look at the overall um, consensus around safety, reciprocity, feeling connected, those things tend to be disrupted, right? No matter how many things they buy you or how many fancy restaurants you go to, I still don't feel like you want me.
Yeah. Yeah, that lack mindset, that lack experience, right? So they can do all of the things, like everything that they can do, and it will never be enough.
Right, right. Because your concept is still, your concept of value is based on how people treat you.
Mm-hmm.
Relational trauma can really disrupt how you see yourself,
Mm-hmm.
feel about yourself. Um, and when people are coming to therapy, it's because something is not clicking, something
Right.
not fulfilling, and you may feel empty. You may
Mm-hmm.
pain. You may feel stressed and really preoccupied with this relationship all the time, right? That's what you think about when you wake up and what you go to sleep. There's just persistent worry. So it's not just that there's issues in the relationship, but it's how it's impacting you that is considered traumatic.
Exactly. Exactly. That persistent worry, that neediness, like I need you to be with me all the time. Over, I think we were talking about it earlier, like, expecting for that person to make you happy all of the time,
Yeah.
right? That is that person's job to make you happy. A plus B equals C. And that's really an unfair and unrealistic expectation for somebody to make you happy every single moment of the day. And if they're not doing that, then the relationship is not working, right?
Right.
That can come from some relational trauma as well. So,
And that's slightly different from having standards and boundaries. We'll talk about that. But the relationship issues we work on in therapy is like your relationship to yourself. Are you treating
mm-hmm,
yourself good? Do you say
mm-hmm,
good words to you? Are you doing nice things for you? Do you take yourself out?
yep.
Do you value how you look? If it's all kind of determined or contingent on how someone else views you, you'll never feel like you popping. You'll never feel like you got it,
No.
even though you do. And that's the
Mm,
dysfunctional part that kind of happens is when there's relational trauma or you've been in traumatic relationships, it really disrupts how you see yourself.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you know what? I love that you said that because there is a way in which trauma creates this sense of like lack of control, right? So waiting for someone else to fulfill you, solely to fulfill you, right, perpetuates this idea of like, I don't have any control and trying to control things that you don't have control over,
Like the other
right? Because yeah, you can't control what they're doing. So it kind of recreates the cycle of like, I don't have any control. See, they're not making me happy. They're not respecting my boundaries. They're not doing this versus like you doing those things for yourself and then attracting the people who respect that part of you and
yeah.
can amplify that part of you.
Or value that or that are interested in learning more about that thing. Not that everyone is going to be at the same level, but am I willing to learn to speak loving language to myself so that I can communicate loving language to a potential partner or even family member when they're
Mm-hmm,
on their best behavior, right? Someone
mm-hmm.
coming at you with all that heat, can I respond from a loving place? Because that's how I talk to myself to say, you know what? I don't think now's a good time
Yeah.
to talk. I'm going to reach back out to you tomorrow.
Listen, we just unpacked lots of good stuff.
Please note this is not a replacement for therapy, but we do encourage you to use Trauma Chat with L&L podcast as a part of your wellness plan.
Because we want you to have the knowledge you need to take the next steps.
And if any of this resonates with you and you'd like to discover how to move from surviving to thriving, please go to my website at urbanhealthgroupinc.org.
And or my website, holisticquestwellness.co, to connect with a licensed therapist where we provide a variety of mental health services.
Our links are listed below. We'll see you next Monday.